The blood on Sarah Mitchell's hands belonged to a man who would rather die than let her save him, and she knew as she knelt in the dusty street of Owyhee, Nevada, watching him gasp his last breath in 1882, that this town would never forgive her for being born a woman who dared to learn medicine. She rose slowly, her dark skirts heavy with the dust of defeat, and looked at the crowd that had gathered. Their faces were hard, unforgiving. The dying man's brother pushed through the throng, his eyes blazing with grief and rage. "You killed him," he spat, though they both knew the bullet wound had been fatal long before she arrived. "Which? My brother would be alive if you had not touched him." Sarah said nothing. What could she say? That she had studied for 5 years under her physician father before consumption took him. That she knew more about healing than the drunken barber who called himself a surgeon 3 towns over. That she had begged the man's brother to let her stop the bleeding, to remove the bullet lodged near his lung, but he had shoved her away until it was far too late. The sheriff, a portly man named Henderson, waved his hand dismissively. "Move along, Miss Mitchell. You have caused enough trouble here." She walked back to her small cabin at the edge of town, the same cabin where her father had died 2 years ago, leaving her alone with his medical books and instruments and a town that would not let her use either. The sun was setting over the rugged Nevada mountains, painting the sagebrush gold and crimson, but Sarah saw none of it. She saw only the man's face, the light leaving his eyes, and the knowledge that she could have saved him if they had let her try soon enough. Inside, she washed her hands in the basin, scrubbing until her skin was raw. The water turned pink, then clear. She stared at her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. 23 years old, with her mother's dark hair and her father's serious gray eyes. A woman who had memorized every anatomy text, who could set a bone or stitch a wound with steady hands, who could diagnose pneumonia from the sound of a cough. Useless. All of it useless in a world where men would rather die than admit a woman might save them. The next morning, she was sweeping her porch when she heard the commotion. Horses, many of them, thundering into town. She set down her broom and walked to the main street, staying in the shadows of the buildings. A group of men had arrived, rough-looking trappers and prospectors, their pack animals loaded with furs and supplies. They were arguing with the proprietor of the general store, their voices carrying on the dry air. "We need a doctor," one of them said, a grizzled man with a tobacco-stained beard. "Our friend is in bad shape, fever. He has been burning up for 3 days." "There is no doctor here," the proprietor said. "Not since old Mitchell died. You will have to ride to Silver City, maybe 30 miles east." "He will not make 30 miles, another trapper said desperately. "Please. Someone must know something about medicine." Sarah stepped forward before she could stop herself. "I can help." The trappers turned to look at her. The proprietor shook his head vigorously. "Miss Mitchell, no, you should not involve yourself." "Where is he?" Sarah asked, ignoring the proprietor. She looked at the desperate trapper, the one with fear in his eyes. "Take me to him." They led her to a wagon at the end of the street. In the back, wrapped in blankets despite the heat, lay a man shivering violently. Sarah climbed up and placed her hand on his forehead, burning hot. She pulled back the blanket and saw the infected wound on his leg, red streaks climbing toward his knee. Blood poisoning. Without treatment, he would be dead by nightfall. "I can save him," she said, "but you must do exactly as I say." The trappers looked at each other uncertainly. The grizzled one cleared his throat. "You are a woman." "Yes," Sarah said flatly, "and your friend is dying. So you can let me help him, or you can watch him die while you ride to Silver City looking for a man with a medical degree. Your choice." They hesitated. Then a voice cut through the tension, deep and rough as gravel. "Let her work." Sarah turned and saw him for the first time. He stood apart from the other trappers, taller by half a head, with shoulders so broad they blocked the sun. His hair was dark and hung past his collar, his face weathered and scarred, his jaw covered in several days of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her, pale blue and piercing, studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore buckskin and leather, and his arms, bare to the elbow, showed muscles that spoke of a life lived hard in the mountains. "Declan," the grizzled trapper protested. "She is just a girl." "She is a healer," the big man said, his voice allowing no argument. "And Jim is dying. Let her work." His name was Declan Wallace, Sarah learned as she set to work. He was a mountain man, a trapper who spent most of his time in the high country, coming to civilization only to trade his furs and resupply. The sick man, Jim, was his partner. They had been trapping together for 3 years. Sarah worked quickly, cleaning the wound, lancing the infection, applying a poultice of herbs her father had taught her to prepare. The trappers watched in silence, their skepticism gradually giving way to something like respect as they saw the sureness of her movements, the confidence in her hands. All except Declan Wallace. He did not watch her hands, he watched her face. "He needs to rest," Sarah said finally, wiping her hands on a cloth. "The fever will break by morning if the infection does not spread further. Keep him cool, give him water when he wakes. I will come back this evening to check on him." "How much do we owe you?" the grizzled trapper asked. "Nothing," Sarah said. "Just let me do my job." She climbed down from the wagon and found Declan Wallace standing there, waiting. Up close, he was even larger, at least 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle. He smelled of pine and leather and wood smoke. "Thank you," he said simply. Sarah nodded, unsure what to say. Men did not thank her. Men usually cursed her or ignored her or, at best, tolerated her with reluctance. "Why did you trust me?" she asked. Declan was quiet for a moment, studying her with those pale eyes. "I have seen death many times," he said finally. "I know what it looks like. Jim was dying, you were his only chance." He paused. "And I saw your hands. They were steady, confident. The hands of someone who knows what they are doing." Something in Sarah's chest loosened. A knot she had not known was there. Most men do not care about steady hands if they belong to a woman. "I am not most men," Declan said. It was not a boast, just a statement of fact. "I have lived alone in the mountains for 7 years. I have learned that skill matters more than what people think. A bear does not care if you are a man or a woman. Neither does winter. Neither does death." Sarah found herself studying him back, this strange mountain man who spoke of death and winter in the same breath, who had trusted her when no one else would. "Why do you live alone?" Something flickered in his eyes, something old and painful. "Because people are more dangerous than bears." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, his long strides carrying him back to his men. Sarah stood in the dusty street, watching him go, and wondered what had happened to make a man choose solitude over civilization. True to her word, she returned that evening. Jim's fever had already begun to break. Declan sat beside the wagon, cleaning his rifle. He looked up when she approached, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "He is better," Declan said. "Already trying to talk, complaining about the smell of your poultice." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "That means it is working." She climbed into the wagon to examine Jim, who was indeed awake and decidedly grumpy about being tended by a woman, though his protests lacked real heat. The infection was receding. He would live. "You will need to change the dressing twice a day," Sarah told Declan when she climbed back down. "And make sure he drinks plenty of water. The wound should heal clean if you keep it covered and dry." Declan nodded. "We will be here another few days. For trading, can you come back tomorrow?" "Yes," Sarah said. Then, because something made her brave, she added, "Would you like to see where I work? I have a cabin at the edge of town. It was my father's surgery." Declan looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, towering over her in the gathering darkness. "Yes, I would like that." They walked through town together, and Sarah felt the eyes on them, the whispers starting. She did not care. Let them talk. For once, someone valued her skill more than her gender, and it felt like water in a drought. The cabin was small but neat, one room divided by curtains. The front half was the surgery, with her father's examination table, his shelves of bottles and instruments, his books. The back half was where she lived, a narrow bed, a stove, a trunk of clothes. Declan moved through the surgery slowly, his eyes taking in everything. He paused at the bookshelf, running one scarred finger along the spines. Gray's Anatomy, Materia Medica, Elements of Surgery. He looked at her. "You have read all of these many times," Sarah said. "My father taught me. He wanted a son to pass his knowledge to, but he only had me. So he taught me instead." "He was a wise man," Declan said. "Wisdom is rare." He picked up one of her father's surgical instruments, a scalpel, and examined it carefully before setting it down. "These are good tools, expensive. Your father was a real physician." "He was," Sarah said softly. "The best I have ever known. He could have had a practice in San Francisco or Sacramento, but he chose to come out here. He said people in places like Owyhee needed doctors more than city folk." "And now they have no one," Declan said. It was not a question. "They have me," Sarah said, hearing the bitterness in her own voice. "But they would rather die than let me touch them. You saw what happened yesterday. That man on the street. I could have saved him, but his brother would not let me near him until it was too late." Declan turned to face her fully. In the dim light of the surgery, with her father's books behind him and the medical instruments gleaming on their shelves, he looked utterly out of place, and yet somehow exactly where he belonged. A man of violence and survival, standing in a place dedicated to healing. "Their loss," he said. "And their stupidity. But you saved Jim today, that matters, does it?" Sarah asked. "One man. When I could be saving dozens." "It matters to Jim," Declan said. "It matters to me." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared loneliness. Two people the world had no place for. A healer no one would let heal. A mountain man who had turned his back on humanity. "Why did you really leave civilization?" Sarah asked quietly. Declan was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he moved to the window, looking out at the darkening mountains. "I had a wife once. A family. A homestead in Montana Territory." Sarah waited, her heart suddenly beating faster. "Outlaws came one winter," Declan continued, his voice flat, emotionless in a way that spoke of immense pain buried deep. "I was out checking the trap line when I came back." He stopped. "They were gone, my wife, my daughter, everything that mattered." "I am so sorry," Sarah whispered. "I hunted those men for a year," Declan said. "Found them all, buried them in shallow graves." He turned from the window and his eyes were bleak. "Then I went into the mountains and stayed there. That was 7 years ago. I was 24 years old." Sarah did the arithmetic in her head. He was 31 now. She was 23. He had spent a quarter of his life alone, living with grief and guilt and rage. "You blame yourself," she said. "I should have been there. You could not have known." "That does not matter," Declan said roughly. "I should have been there. I should have protected them. That is what a man does. He protects what is his." Sarah moved closer to him, drawn by something she could not name. "And what if you cannot? What if the world takes them anyway, no matter how strong you are or how much you want to save them?" "Then you are a failure," Declan said bluntly. "You have failed at the only thing that matters." "No," Sarah said fiercely. "Then you are human, fallible, mortal, like the rest of us." She reached out and daringly touched his arm. His muscles tensed under her fingers, hard as iron. You could not save them, just as I could not save that man yesterday, but we can save the ones we can save. We can keep trying. That is what it means to be alive. Declan looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. For a moment she thought she saw something crack in his careful control, something vulnerable and aching. Then he stepped back and the moment passed. I should go, he said. Check on Jim. Sarah let her hand fall. Of course. I will see you tomorrow. He left without another word, but Sarah stood in her empty surgery for a long time afterward, her hand still tingling where she had touched him, her heart still racing with the intimacy of what had passed between them. Over the next 3 days, Sarah tended to Jim, and each time she did, Declan was there. He did not say much, but he watched her work with that same intense focus, learning. On the 3rd day, Jim was well enough to walk around, the wound healing clean and pink. You are a miracle worker, Miss Mitchell, Jim said, grinning. I was sure I was done for. No miracle, Sarah said, just knowledge and clean instruments and a little luck. Well, I am grateful, Jim said. Truly, you saved my life. The other trappers came by that evening bringing gifts. A beaver pelt from one, a string of turquoise beads from another. Small offerings, but heartfelt. Sarah accepted them with grace, touched despite herself. These rough mountain men, at least, did not care that she was a woman. They cared only that she had saved their friend. Declan came last after the others had gone. He carried something wrapped in cloth. I made this for you, he said, handing it to her. Sarah unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a knife, beautifully crafted with a blade that gleamed like silver and a handle of polished wood. Her breath caught. It is for your work, Declan said. Surgical steel. I traded for it in St. Louis last year, had the blacksmith here sharpen it properly. It will hold an edge better than those old scalpels. Sarah held the knife carefully, feeling the weight and balance of it. It was perfect. Too perfect. Too personal. I cannot accept this, she said. It is too valuable. You saved Jim, Declan said. He is my partner, my friend, the only person I trust in this world that is worth more than a knife. Sarah looked up at him, this massive, scarred mountain man with his grief-haunted eyes and his unexpected gentleness. Thank you, she said softly. I will treasure it. They stood in her surgery, the space between them charged with something neither could name. Then Declan cleared his throat. We are leaving tomorrow, he said. Heading back up into the high country, trapping season is starting. Sarah felt something sink in her chest, a disappointment she had no right to feel. How long will you be gone? 4, maybe 5 months, Declan said. We come back down when the first heavy snows hit, usually around November. It was late July now, 4 or 5 months, an eternity. Will you come back here? Sarah asked. To Owyhee? Yes, Declan said. We always winter here. It is remote enough that no one bothers us much. He paused. Will you still be here? Where else would I go? Sarah said with a bitter little laugh. No one else wants me either. That is not true, Declan said, and there was something in his voice, something warm and fierce that made Sarah's pulse quicken. I want. He stopped, shook his head. I should go. Early start tomorrow. He turned to leave, and Sarah knew that if she let him walk out that door, something important would be lost, something that might never come again. Declan, she said. He stopped, turned back. Sarah took a breath, gathering her courage. When you come back in November, will you come see me? Not just for Jim's wound. For yourself. Declan stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and it transformed his face, chasing away the shadows and revealing the man he might have been before grief carved him hollow. Yes, he said. I will come see you. And then he was gone, walking out into the Nevada night, and Sarah was alone again. But this time, the loneliness felt different, because for the first time in 2 years, she had something to look forward to, someone who might come back. The months that followed were long and hard. Summer burned into fall, the heat baking the sagebrush and turning the hills brown. Sarah tended the few patients who would accept her help, mostly women and children, occasionally a drifter passing through who did not know or care about Owyhee's prejudices. She studied her father's books again, practicing her stitches on pieces of leather, keeping her skills sharp. At night she thought about Declan Wallace, wondered where he was, if he was safe. The mountains were dangerous, she knew. Bears, wolves, harsh weather, accidents. Men died up there all the time, their bodies found months or years later by other trappers if they were found at all. She told herself she was being foolish. She barely knew the man. They had spoken perhaps a dozen times, shared one evening of confidences. He was a stranger, a loner, a man who had buried his heart with his wife and daughter. He would not come back. Or if he did, it would be only to trade his furs to resupply, and then disappear back into the wilderness that had claimed him. But she kept the knife he had given her on her work table, where she could see it every day. And she waited. November came, bringing cold winds down from the mountains. The first snows dusted the peaks. Sarah began to watch the road into town, her heart jumping every time she saw riders approaching. But none of them were Declan. Then, on a bitter morning when frost covered the ground and her breath steamed in the air, she heard the sound of many horses. She ran to her door and saw them, a line of pack animals and riders, coming down the mountain road. Trappers, their animals laden with furs. She scanned the group frantically, looking for a tall figure, broad shoulders, dark hair. There. At the front of the group, sitting easy on a massive roan horse, was Declan Wallace. He was thinner than she remembered, his face more weathered, his beard longer. But those pale blue eyes were the same, and when he saw her standing in her doorway, something lit in them, something warm and alive. He dismounted and walked toward her, and Sarah felt her heart hammering in her chest. He stopped a few feet away, as if unsure of his welcome. "Hello," he said, his voice rough from months of disuse. "Hello," Sarah said, and was shocked to feel tears prickling her eyes. "You came back." "I said I would," Declan said simply. "I keep my promises." They stood there looking at each other, and Sarah realized with a shock how much she had missed him, not just the idea of him, but him specifically. His quiet strength, his careful way of speaking, the respect he showed her skill and knowledge. No one else in this town looked at her the way he did, as if she mattered. "How was your trapping season?" she asked. "Good, plenty of beaver, some marten. We will have enough to see us through the winter." He shifted his weight. "How have you been?" "The same," Sarah said. "Healing those who will let me, watching others die who will not." She tried to smile. "The usual," Declan frowned. "That is wrong, they are fools." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "But they are fools who will not change their minds." "Then maybe you should go somewhere else," Declan said. "A bigger town, a city, somewhere they need doctors and do not care if you are a woman." Sarah had thought about it many times, but she shook her head. "This was my father's practice. His dream, I cannot abandon it, even if it is killing you." Declan asked quietly. Sarah looked at him in surprise. "I am not dying." "No," Declan agreed. "But you are not living either. I can see it in your eyes. You are fading, Sarah Mitchell. This town is draining the life out of you drop by drop." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his rough voice made something flutter in her chest. But his words stung because they were true. She was fading. Every rejection, every death she could not prevent, every patient who spat at her or called her witch, it took a piece of her soul. How long before there was nothing left? I do not know what else to do, she said honestly. This is all I have, all I know. Declan took a step closer. He was so tall she had to tilt her head back to look at him, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the pine and leather and cold mountain air that clung to him. You could come with me, he said. Sarah's breath caught. What? Into the mountains, Declan said. There are mining camps up there, small settlements, places where people need a doctor and do not have one. You could help them, save lives, actually do the work you trained for. I could not, Sarah protested. I cannot just leave. Why not? Declan challenged. What is keeping you here? People who hate you, a cabin full of memories. Your father is dead, Sarah. You do not owe him your life. The words were harsh but not unkind. Declan's eyes were intense on hers, willing her to see what he saw. Think about it, he said. We will be here through the winter. That gives you time to decide, but I meant what I said. You are dying here. Come to the mountains. Live. He turned and walked away before she could respond, leaving Sarah standing in her doorway, shaking and exhilarated and terrified all at once. Go to the mountains. Leave everything behind. Start over. Could she really do that? The winter settled in, and Owyhee became a cold, isolated place, snowbound and quiet. The trappers set up camp on the outskirts of town, their tents and lean toss weathering the storms. Declan came to see Sarah often, bringing her supplies, checking on her welfare. They talked for hours about medicine and trapping, about books and survival, about the strange turns their lives had taken. Slowly, carefully, they became friends. And then something more. It started small. A hand lingering too long when he passed her something. A look held just a moment past propriety. The way her heart raced when she heard his footsteps on her porch. The way he found excuses to touch her, steadying her elbow on the icy path, brushing snow from her hair. Then came the day in late December when Sarah was called to help a woman in difficult labor. The baby was breech, and Sarah worked for hours, finally managing to turn the child and deliver it safely. Both mother and baby survived, but Sarah was exhausted, her dress soaked with sweat and blood, her hands trembling with fatigue. She stumbled home through the snow as night fell, so tired she could barely see straight. She did not notice the ice patch until her foot slipped, and then she was falling, too tired to catch herself. Strong arms caught her, lifted her easily. Declan. Of course it was Declan. He carried her to her cabin, kicked open the door, and set her gently on her bed. You are frozen, he said roughly, feeling her icy hands, and exhausted. When did you last eat? Sarah tried to remember and could not. This morning. Yesterday, Declan cursed under his breath and went to her stove, building up the fire. He heated water, made tea, found bread and cheese in her cupboard. He brought it to her, sat beside her on the bed, and made her eat and drink while he watched with worried eyes. You have to take care of yourself, he said. You cannot help others if you collapse. I am fine, Sarah protested, but her voice was weak. You are not fine, Declan said fiercely. You are working yourself to death for people who do not appreciate you. This has to stop. Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes, born of exhaustion and frustration and loneliness. What else can I do? I am a healer. This is what I do. Then heal people who want your help, Declan said. He took her hands in his touch warm and gentle despite his scarred, calloused palms. Come with me, please. Let me show you a different life. Sarah looked at their joined hands, his so large they swallowed hers completely, and felt something break inside her. All the resistance, all the stubborn determination to stay in this place that had never wanted her, it crumbled. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will come with you. Declan's eyes widened as if he had not truly believed she would say yes. Then, slowly, carefully, he raised her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender and old-fashioned that Sarah felt her heart melt. I will keep you safe, he said. I swear it, no one will hurt you again. I am not afraid of being hurt, Sarah said. I am afraid of wasting my life, of my skills dying with me unused. They will not, Declan promised. I will take you to every camp, every settlement in the mountains. You will have more patience than you can handle, and all of them will be grateful. You will see. That night, for the first time since her father died, Sarah felt hope. Real hope, bright and warm and full of possibility. She was 23 years old, and her life was finally about to begin. They left Owyhee in early March, when the worst of the winter had passed, but before the spring thaw made the mountain passes impassable. Sarah packed her father's medical supplies carefully, his instruments and books and medicines, everything she would need. She sold the cabin to the general store proprietor for a pittance, not caring about the money. She was buying her freedom. The townspeople watched her go with a mixture of relief and resentment. Good riddance to the witch woman, their faces said. But a very few, looked sad. The women she had helped in childbirth, the children whose fevers she had broken. They knew what the town was losing. Declan led the way on his big roan horse, with Sarah riding beside him on a gentle mare he had procured for her. Behind them came Jim and the other trappers, leading the pack animals. They headed northeast into the Ruby Mountains, following trails that only mountain men knew. The journey was hard. The passes were still choked with snow, the nights bitterly cold. But Declan was always there, helping her navigate difficult terrain, making sure she was warm and fed, watching over her with a protectiveness that would have irritated Sarah from any other man, but from him felt like a gift. On the fourth night, they made camp in a sheltered valley. The men set up tents while Declan built a large fire. Sarah sat close to the flames, warming her hands, watching Declan move with easy competence. He was in his element here, she realized. In town, he had seemed constrained, too large for the small buildings and narrow streets. But here in the wilderness he was magnificent. He caught her watching and came to sit beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Not too cold, I am fine," Sarah said. "Better than fine, I am happy." Declan smiled, that rare, transformative smile. "Good. I want you to be happy." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. Then Declan said quietly, "I have not felt this way in a long time. Content, like maybe life can be good again." Sarah turned to look at him. His face was half in shadow, the firelight dancing across his features, highlighting the scars and the hard lines of pain and survival. "What way?" she asked softly. Declan met her eyes. "Like I have something to protect again, something worth living for." Sarah's breath caught. The air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility. Slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, she reached out and touched his face, her palm against his bearded cheek. Declan froze, his eyes locked on hers. Then, with a sound that was almost a groan, he pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest, as if she were something precious and fragile. Sarah felt the steady thunder of his heartbeat, felt the strength in his arms, and knew that she was falling in love with this broken, gentle giant of a man. "I cannot promise you an easy life," Declan said, his voice rumbling in his chest. "The mountains are hard, dangerous. You will be cold and tired and sometimes afraid." "I do not need easy," Sarah said. "I need purpose. I need to be somewhere I matter." "You matter to me," Declan said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made Sarah's eyes sting with tears. She pulled back just enough to see his face. "When your wife died, you thought you would never care about anyone again." "I did not want to," Declan agreed. "Caring means you can lose. I could not survive that again." "But you are risking it now," Sarah said. "With me." Declan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "You are worth the risk. You are brave and brilliant and kind. You heal people, Sarah. You save lives. I watched you work and I knew you were someone extraordinary." "I am just a woman with some medical training," Sarah protested weakly. "No," Declan said fiercely. "You are a miracle. You are light in the darkness. And I am a fool for falling in love with you, but I cannot help it. I love you, Sarah Mitchell. I think I have loved you since the moment you climbed into that wagon and saved Jim's life." Sarah felt the tears spill over, hot against her cold cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not want to. You terrified me at first, so big and fierce and damaged. But you saw me, really saw me, not as a failed man or a lesser doctor, but as myself. That is all I ever wanted." Declan kissed her then, and it was nothing like Sarah had imagined a kiss would be. It was gentle and fierce at once, claiming and cherishing, and it made her feel like she was coming home after a long journey. His beard rasped against her skin, his lips were warm, and when he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "Marry me," Declan said. "Not now, but someday, when you are ready. Be my wife, my partner. Let me spend my life protecting you and loving you and making sure you can do the work you were meant to do." Sarah laughed through her tears. "That is the strangest proposal I have ever heard." "It is the only one I have got," Declan said, almost smiling. "What do you say?" "Yes," Sarah said. "Yes, I will marry you. Someday. When we are ready." They sealed the promise with another kiss, and then Declan wrapped his coat around both of them, and they sat by the fire until it burned down to embers, just holding each other, two lonely souls who had finally found a home. They reached the first mining camp a week later. It was a rough place, a collection of tents and hastily built cabins clinging to a mountainside where men dug for silver. The miners were a hard, suspicious lot, but when Declan introduced Sarah as a physician, their attitudes changed fast. "We have not had a doctor up here in 2 years," the foreman said. "Men have died from injuries that should not have killed them. If you can really help, we will pay you whatever you ask." Sarah set up a temporary surgery in one of the cabins, and within hours, she had patients. A man with a badly infected cut. Another with a broken arm that had been set wrong and needed to be rebroken and reset. A third with a persistent cough that Sarah diagnosed as early pneumonia. She worked from dawn until dark, and the miners treated her with a respect that bordered on reverence. Here, in this rough camp where death was a constant companion, no one cared that she was a woman. They cared only that she could stop the bleeding, set the bones, and keep them alive. Declan stayed close, helping her when she needed it, carrying supplies, keeping watch. The miners quickly learned that Sarah Mitchell was under the protection of Declan Wallace, and that meant she was untouchable. No one would dare bother her with Declan looming nearby, his pale eyes promising violence to anyone who showed her disrespect. They stayed at the camp for 2 weeks, until Sarah had treated everyone who needed help and set up a system for keeping wounds clean and preventing infection. When they left, the miners pressed silver coins into her hands, more money than she had made in a year in Owyhee. "Thank you," the foreman said gruffly. "You saved a lot of lives here. Come back if you can." "I will," Sarah promised. They traveled to other camps, other settlements. A logging operation where a man had nearly severed his leg with an axe, and Sarah spent 3 hours in delicate surgery putting him back together. A small town where an outbreak of measles threatened the children, and Sarah quarantined the sick and nursed them through the crisis. A trapper's rendezvous where she set broken bones and treated frostbite and taught the men basic wound care. Everywhere they went, Sarah's reputation grew. The woman doctor who traveled with the mountain man. The healer who could save men that others had given up for dead. People began to seek her out, sending messages to Declan asking when the doctor would return, begging for help with this ailment or that injury. And Sarah flourished. For the first time in her life, she was doing what she had been trained to do, using all her skills and knowledge without restraint. She was exhausted, yes, and the work was hard, but she had never been happier. Every life she saved, every patient she healed, it validated her father's decision to teach her, her own decision to keep learning after he died. She was making a difference, a real, tangible difference. As spring turned to summer, Sarah and Declan's relationship deepened. They were partners now, working together seamlessly. He handled the logistics of travel, kept her safe, helped her with the heavy work. She taught him basic medical skills, showed him how to clean wounds properly, how to recognize signs of serious illness. They fit together like two pieces of a puzzle, complementing each other's strengths and shoring up each other's weaknesses. The physical side of their relationship remained chaste, though the desire was there, simmering between them. Declan was old-fashioned enough to want to wait until they were married, and Sarah respected that, even as she sometimes lay awake in her tent, listening to him move around the camp, wanting him with an intensity that startled her. In late June, they returned to a larger town, a place called Elko, to resupply. It had a church, a real church with a minister. Declan took Sarah's hand as they walked past it. "Will you marry me now?" he asked. "Here, today. I do not want to wait anymore, Sarah. I want you to be my wife." Sarah looked at the church, then at Declan's face, so earnest and hopeful and vulnerable. They had known each other for almost a year now, had been living and working together for 4 months. She knew his habits, his moods, his nightmares. She knew that he snored softly when he slept, that he had a sweet tooth for honey, that he could track a deer through a forest like magic. She knew he would die to protect her, and that he loved her with a fierceness that sometimes took her breath away. "Yes," she said, "let us get married today." The ceremony was simple. Just Sarah and Declan, the minister, and Jim as a witness. Sarah wore her best dress, the blue calico she had saved for special occasions, and Declan had trimmed his beard and combed his hair. He held her hands and spoke his vows in that rough, sincere voice, promising to love and honor and cherish her for the rest of his life. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Declan kissed her with a tenderness that made Sarah's knees weak. She was married. She was Sarah Wallace now, and this extraordinary man was her husband. They spent their wedding night in a hotel, a real luxury after months of sleeping in tents. Declan was gentle and patient, and if their lovemaking was a bit awkward at first, fumbling in the darkness, it was also beautiful and right. Sarah fell asleep in her husband's arms, feeling safer and more loved than she had ever felt in her life. The next 2 years passed in a blur of travel and work. Declan and Sarah established a circuit, visiting the same camps and settlements on a regular schedule, so people knew when to expect the doctor. Sarah's skills grew as she dealt with every kind of injury and illness the frontier could throw at her. She delivered babies in snowstorms, amputated a gangrenous leg with only whiskey for anesthetic, treated gunshot wounds, and bare maulings and cases of lead poisoning from bad whiskey. And slowly, gradually, she noticed something changing. Men who had been skeptical at first, who had doubted her because of her gender, began to believe. They saw the results of her work, saw men who should have died walking around healthy and whole. Word spread. The doctor in the mountains. The woman who could work miracles. Declan watched it all with quiet pride. He had known from the beginning what Sarah was capable of. Now the world was finally catching up. In the spring of 1884, Sarah realized she was pregnant. She told Declan one evening as they made camp and watched his face transform with joy and terror in equal measure. "A baby," he said, his voice shaking. He put his hand on her still flat stomach, his palm huge and warm. "Sarah, are you sure?" "I am sure," Sarah said. "I am a doctor, remember. I know the signs." Declan pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt him shaking and realized he was crying, this massive, strong man who had not shed a tear in all the time she had known him. "I am afraid," he confessed. "I lost one child already. If something happens to you, to the baby, I do not know if I can survive it." Sarah held him back just as tightly. "Nothing is going to happen," she said firmly. "I am young and healthy and I know how to deliver babies. I have done it dozens of times. We will be fine." "Promise me," Declan said desperately. "Promise me you will be careful, you will not take risks." "I promise," Sarah said. "Our baby is the most important thing. I will not jeopardize that." They modified their circuit that year, staying at lower elevations, avoiding the most difficult terrain. Sarah continued to work, but she was careful not to overdo it, conscious of the life growing inside her. Declan was absurdly protective, hovering over her constantly, driving her a bit crazy with his worry. "I am pregnant, not dying," Sarah told him exasperatedly one day. "I am capable of walking to the stream by myself." "I know," Declan said, "but humor me, please. I need to feel like I am protecting you." Sarah softened, understanding. He was reliving old trauma, old failures. She kissed him gently. "You are protecting me every single day. But you have to trust me too. Trust that I know my own body, my own limits." Declan nodded, though the worry never quite left his eyes. Their son was born in November, in a small cabin they had rented for the winter in a town called Ruby Valley. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Declan, pacing outside the cabin while Jim's wife attended Sarah, thought he would lose his mind with fear. But finally, he heard the thin, furious wail of a newborn, and Jim's wife called him inside. Sarah lay in bed, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle. Declan approached slowly, reverently, and looked down at his son. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and a pair of lungs that could wake the dead. He was perfect. "David," Sarah said softly. "David Lyle Wallace. Do you like it?" Declan could not speak. He touched his son's tiny hand, and the baby's fingers curled around his calloused, scarred index finger with surprising strength. Something in Declan's chest, something that had been broken and dead for 8 years, suddenly came back to life. "He is beautiful," Declan finally managed. "You are beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for this gift." Sarah smiled, tired but radiant. "He is going to be big like his father. I could tell even before he was born. He kicked like a mule." Declan laughed, a sound so rare that Sarah treasured it. He climbed carefully into bed beside her, wrapping his arms around both his wife and his son. And for the first time since his first family died, he allowed himself to believe in the future. Motherhood changed Sarah's practice, but did not end it. She wore David in a sling against her chest while she worked, and he grew up surrounded by medicine and healing. By the time he was 2, he could hand her the right instrument without being asked. By 3, he was helping to roll bandages. He was a solemn, watchful child, more like his father than his mother, but he had Sarah's gray eyes and her quick mind. Declan was a devoted father, patient and gentle in ways that surprised everyone who knew his reputation. The fierce mountain man who had hunted outlaws and killed bears with a knife was reduced to putty by a toddler's smile. He taught David to track and hunt, to read the weather and respect the mountains. Sarah taught him to read and write, to understand the basics of medicine and biology. When David was 4, Sarah became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she gave birth to a daughter they named Sophie Grace. She had her father's pale blue eyes and her mother's dark hair, and from the moment she could walk, she was a force of nature. fearless and willful and absolutely certain that the world revolved around her. "She is going to be trouble," Declan said, watching his 3-year-old daughter attempt to climb a tree that was far too tall for her. "She is going to be magnificent," Sarah corrected, going to lift Sophie down before she hurt herself. Life settled into a rhythm. Summers, they traveled their circuit, with David and Sophie now part of the caravan. The children were mountain-raised, tough and resilient, able to sleep anywhere and eat anything. They became mascots of sorts in the camps they visited, and the rough miners and loggers doted on them shamelessly. Winters, they stayed in Ruby Valley, where Sarah had established a more permanent practice. The town had grown around her reputation, attracting people who needed medical care and knew they could find it there. She trained a young woman from town as a nurse, passing on her knowledge the way her father had passed it to her. Declan continued to trap and hunt, but less now. He was 40 years old, his body showing the wear of decades of hard living. He still looked formidable with his broad shoulders and muscled arms, but he moved a bit slower, his old injuries aching in cold weather. He did not mind. He had a family now, a real home. The mountains were still his church, but they were no longer his refuge from pain. They were simply where he lived, where he raised his children, where he loved his wife. One evening, when David was 7 and Sophie was 5, Sarah sat on the porch of their cabin, watching Declan teach the children to make a fire. The sun was setting behind the Ruby Mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside, she had a surgery stocked with supplies, a waiting room full of patients who would come tomorrow. She had a husband who loved her, children who made her laugh, work that fulfilled her. She thought back to that day in Owyhee, kneeling in the dust beside a dying man, believing that her life was over before it had really begun. She had been so wrong. Her life had not ended in that dusty Nevada town. It had been waiting to begin, waiting for her to be brave enough to leave, to risk, to trust in a scarred mountain man who had seen her for who she truly was. Declan looked up from the fire and caught her watching. He smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that he saved just for her, and Sarah felt her heart swell with love and gratitude and joy. "I love you," she called out. "I love you too," Declan called back. "Always, always." It was a promise he had kept every single day since he made it, and Sarah knew he would keep it for the rest of their lives. As the years passed, their family continued to grow. Sarah gave birth to another son, Samuel, when Sophie was 7. Samuel was quieter than his siblings, bookish and thoughtful, more interested in Sarah's medical texts than in Declan's lessons about tracking and hunting. Sarah suspected he would follow in her footsteps, become a doctor in his own right. She began teaching him early, and he absorbed knowledge like a sponge. David grew into a younger version of his father, tall and broad-shouldered, with the same protective instincts and quiet strength. At 16, he was already taller than most grown men, and he had his father's gift for reading the wilderness. Declan took him on longer and longer trips into the high country, teaching him the trapline routes, the secret passes, the places where game was plentiful and water was clean. Sophie grew into a beautiful, headstrong young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's stubbornness. She wanted to be a doctor like her mother, but she also wanted to be a trapper like her father, and she saw no reason why she could not do both. At 14, she could set a broken bone or skin a deer with equal skill, and she argued medicine and philosophy with her mother while her father taught her to shoot and track. Sarah's practice thrived. Ruby Valley became known throughout the Nevada territory as the place to go for medical care. Doctors began to seek her out, young men fresh from medical school in the East who wanted to learn from the legendary woman doctor of the mountains. Sarah took on students, training them the way her father had trained her, insisting that they treat every patient with respect and dignity regardless of gender or race or social standing. Declan watched it all with quiet pride. His wife had changed the world one patient at a time, and he had been privileged to help her do it. He was 52 now, his hair more gray than black, his face deeply lined. He moved slower, tired more easily, but he was content in a way he had never imagined possible. He had outlived his grief, found love again, raised a family. That was enough. More than enough. One crisp autumn evening when the aspens were turning gold and the air smelled of wood smoke and fallen leaves, Declan and Sarah sat on their porch watching the sunset. Their children were inside, David and Samuel arguing good-naturedly about something, Sophie singing as she prepared dinner. The sounds of family, of life. "You ever think about Owyhee?" Declan asked. "The town that did not want you," Sarah considered. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I wonder if things have changed there, if they have a doctor now, if the people are still dying for lack of proper care." "Do you regret leaving?" "Not for a single moment," Sarah said firmly. She took Declan's hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Leaving Owyhee was the best decision I ever made. It brought me to you. It gave me a life where I could be who I was meant to be." "I am glad," Declan said. "Because meeting you saved my life, Sarah. I was dead inside, just going through the motions. You brought me back to life. Gave me a reason to care again, to hope again." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. They had been married for 20 years now, and she loved him more with every passing day. He was her partner, her protector, her best friend. He had kept every promise he had ever made to her. "We have had a good life," she said softly. "The best," Declan agreed. "And it is not over yet. We still have years ahead of us, grandchildren to spoil, more people to help." Sarah smiled. "I like the sound of that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky, the first stars appearing overhead. Inside, their children laughed and argued and sang, the sounds of family filling the cabin. The mountains rose around them, eternal and protective, the wilderness that had given them both refuge and purpose. Sarah Mitchell Wallace, the healer no one would let heal them, had found her place in the world. She had found love and family and work that mattered. She had saved hundreds of lives, trained dozens of students, changed the way people thought about women in medicine. Her father would have been proud. And Declan Wallace, the mountain man who had lost everything and thought he would never care again, had found a reason to live. He had protected his wife and children, helped his community, made a difference in ways big and small. His first wife and daughter were still in his heart, always would be. But he had learned that the heart was big enough for old griefs and new joys, for loss and love, for endings and beginnings. As full darkness fell, they went inside to join their children. There was dinner to eat, stories to tell, tomorrow's plans to discuss. Life, in all its messy, beautiful complexity, waiting to be lived, and they lived it together for many more years. Until Declan's hair was white and his steps were slow, until Sarah's hands were gnarled with arthritis but still steady when it mattered. They saw David marry and start a family of his own. They watched Sophie become a doctor and a legend in her own right, the woman who traveled to the most remote camps and settlements, following in her mother's footsteps. They helped Samuel through medical school, saw him return to Ruby Valley to join his mother's practice. They grew old together, side by side, partners until the end. And when Declan finally died, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73 with Sarah holding his hand, his last words were, "Thank you for healing my heart." Sarah lived another 5 years after that, long enough to see her first great-grandchild born, long enough to train one more generation of doctors, long enough to know that her legacy would continue. When she died, at the age of 71, she was surrounded by her children and grandchildren, by students who had become colleagues and friends, by a community that had grown up around her practice and her vision. They buried her next to Declan on a hillside overlooking Ruby Valley, with the mountains rising all around and the aspens whispering in the wind. Her gravestone was simple: Sarah Mitchell Wallace, 1859–1930, physician, healer, beloved wife and mother. But the real monument to her life was not the gravestone. It was the hospital that her children built in her honor, the Sarah Wallace Memorial Hospital, where anyone could receive care regardless of their ability to pay. It was the dozens of doctors she had trained, who went on to train others, spreading her philosophy of compassionate, skilled care. It was the changed attitudes about women in medicine, the doors she had kicked open for those who came after. And it was the love story she and Declan had written together, two broken people who had healed each other, who had built a life of purpose and meaning in the wild mountains of Nevada. A story of trust and courage, and the transformative power of being truly seen and valued. The healer no one would let heal them had found the one man who trusted her skills enough to let her save his life. And in doing so, she had saved his heart, and he had saved hers. And together, they had created something beautiful and lasting that would echo through generations. That was the true miracle. Not the lives she saved, though there were hundreds, not the students she trained, though they changed the world. The miracle was love, found in the most unlikely of places, between the most unlikely of people, enduring through decades and hardships and the simple, grinding challenges of building a life together. The miracle was two lonely souls finding each other in the vast wilderness and deciding to stop being lonely, to risk again, to love again, to live, and they lived fully and completely with passion and purpose and joy. They lived the way everyone should live, but few managed to. They lived well. In the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything,